Hey, this is Genghis John.
Did you know that you could be proud of the music you're making 90 days from now, even if you've never made music before? All it takes is a commitment to 5 minutes a day. Yep, just 5 minutes, and you'll embark on a transformative journey into music production and self-discovery. Can you spare that? I'm Bill Gates, and I've spent 20 years distilling my experiences with Grammy-winning artists, making tracks played over 65 million times into something epic for you, The Producer's Path. This isn't just a course, it's a gateway to mastering music production without needing expensive gear or prior experience. You don't need to be born rich, you don't need to be born gifted. All you need is a commitment to spending 5 minutes a day on music. The Producer's Path is a proven system that has supported top artists throughout the industry. And now it's your turn to access these secrets and forge your own unique sound. As you journey through the 12 levels of the Producer's Path, each step designed to build your skills and confidence, you'll not only learn music production, but also discover how to express your individual style, breaking the rules like a true artist. Join our vibrant Producer Dojo community, get feedback on your tracks, and maybe even feature on a Dojo mixtape. With no subscriptions and free updates for life, your path to music mastery is evergreen, and you can come back again and again and again, getting more out of it each time. So what's it going to be? Continue as is, or spend the next 90 days at the dojo transforming into the music producer you've always wanted to be? Listen to what your fellow dojo members have achieved with the Producer's Path. Their success stories could be yours.
I started from zero.
Dude, the way you laid it out,
Here's what you do first.
It's amazing.
The habit tracking changed my whole mindset.
honestly,
Huge breakthrough.
Huge difference.
comprehensive.
Game changers.
It gives me goosebumps.
Just blows my mind.
That's when I was like, okay, I can make music.
I'm actually doing some art
Making music felt more real at that point.
to understand, hey, motherfucker, I'm doing this shit right.
I can show my children's children who I was.
Other people have been saying it sounds good.
And everybody's, oh, that's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting.
Never found the answer until I went to the Producer's Path.
Yes. What up? Live again on YouTube. Good times. I'm going to do another artist development session today. And we're actually starting a little bit ahead of schedule because my man Phil was already here and ready to go because he's a keener. So, yeah, we're starting early, and I'm going to try to not take 3 hours this time, but this stuff is important, and it's important to ask all these questions if you want to develop your brand as an artist. And the time to start thinking about your brand is right now. It really is. I can't even say enough how you should really be thinking about your brand right away, because your brand is your style. It is your musical identity. It is what you're even trying to do. So it's not something to put on the back burner and think like, oh, I'll, just kind of do whatever and then slap a cartoon animal on the front of it and hope for the best. That is not how it works. No amount of pretty girl eyes gazing into the camera or astronauts gazing out of portals are going to make your badly conceived ideas into well-conceived ideas. That's just a fact. So to get at how to do that, we have artistic development sessions like this one. What is up? We've got Phil and we've got Josh. And I think we're going to be joined shortly by another person who was not as early as you two keeners. Welcome. What's up, guys? How you doing?
What's up, man? Doing great over here.
Yeah, I'm feeling good today, too. I love the beard. I feel like I'm talking to an Assyrian king right now. It's awesome.
Takes a lot of work, man. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, really good. I'm feeling very beardless in this conversation. I gotta start growing harder or something. Cool. Well, okay. So while the both of you are here, I don't know if you got a chance to watch any of the video from the last artistic development session that I did. I know it was a little bit long. I'm gonna try and be a bit more punctual today, but basically, it's going to be the same kind of questions because you really need to get clear on like what you're trying to do, right? Because branding, it's not an afterthought. Branding is like the target, branding is focus, right? And the sooner you can think about it as like not a marketing term that's gross, but like, what the focus of your project is, the better you're going to have a relationship with branding, and the more you can kind of shape your work into a coherent style and message and everything. Because okay, we got Jacob. All right, that is all three. The circle is complete. Hooray, hooray. Okay, so I can probably close the participants windows now. Yeah, okay, great. So what up? Welcome. But yeah, so branding, branding is basically that set of distinguishing characteristics that make your project unique in the mind of the public and in the mind of the world, right? When people talk about your music, they need to basically independently describe it in the same way that you would, and you should be able to wordlessly communicate what the style and message of your brand are to your audience, right? And your brand may not necessarily be what you want it to be. There's lots of examples of people who, try to rebrand as something, but it does not work. And then there are lots of people who, have a powerful personal brand and are definitely not marketers. It's really just like, how unique is this thing? How would you describe it? What makes this thing what it is and not something else, right? And when it comes to music, artists hear notes and instruments, but fans hear vibe and style and, feelings, emotions, what the music is about, etc. And if you put a lot of time and thought into what it is that you're trying to say, how you're saying it, etc., a lot of the technical stuff that people are, especially newer producers, will be like freaking out about all this technical stuff. Like, oh my God, they're going to know I used a high pass when I should have used a shelf. What will they think? And it's just like, nobody really cares about any of that. Like there's a level of incompetence in terms of mixing that will like disqualify you. But as long as you're like above the disqualification threshold in most of the skill areas, then you're fine. And the disqualification threshold, can be pretty low for certain things. Like the level of technical skill required to make like punk rock or like, really good lo-fi beats or like gabber or chill house is not high. Like you can make perfectly good music in those genres without really relying on a whole lot of technical skill, but you're not going to make good music in those genres if you haven't put careful time and thought into style. Style is everything. There are some genres that are basically only style, such as punk, right? I mean, there's also, there are elements and there are better or worse punk bands, but when I listen to punk rock music, I'm not like, oh, let's go check out the most refined virtuoso musicians ever in the most expensive studios with the best production and like totally innovative techniques. That's not why I'm listening to a punk record. I'm like, mad about something and I need to vent and be like, yeah, there's a line in the sand. Cool people are on this side of the line. Stupid people are on the other side of the line. And then you get to like point your finger and be mad. Like that's what punk rock is about, So it's like, the sooner you can start thinking about this, the sooner the technical stuff is going to become like less relevant or just, more forgivable. And the more fun the project's going to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it all just kind of comes together when you put some time and thought into style. So I'm going to ask each of you a few questions about what makes you tick as musicians and what you're trying to do. And then we're going to come around with a hypothetical scenario in the second half. All right. So now we are going to start here with Phil. You are the first on my screen. So if you could please unmute and I will pin you and you are pinned. All right. So let's talk about what makes the music that you're trying to make distinct. What can you tell me about what it is that you would like to create?
Yeah, I think
The important thing for me is to try and like connect with the audience and make them feel something. So I really like uh I'd say like the likes of Porter Robinson and kind of producers like that who've got a real
Nice.
sense of like nostalgia and that kind of thing, you know. I like music that kind of the way I think about it is like I like music that like it grabs you by the pit of your stomach, you know, it makes the pit of your stomach clench, and then from there it kind of pushes and pulls you into whatever direction the artist wants you to go. So it can make you laugh, it can make you like it can release all the rage inside you, it can make you cry, you know, kind of that's like the main focus for me is to like evoke that in people, you know, just to give people like that cathartic experience, and to be on the stage like giving that to a crowd would be amazing. So that's kind of what I'm going
Okay.
for, I guess.
That's a great place to start. Now what different people have different emotional reactions to different things. You know, there may be someone who has a more profound emotional reaction than you've ever felt listening to any music in your life, and that is triggered by like Taylor Swift. You know, whereas like, you know, the different things what turns your crank may be different than that. So it's not that any of them are right or wrong. It's just that emotional gut punch needs a little bit more definition. So do you have a list of particular songs and artists that have caused you to have that feeling?
Definitely, yeah. I would say Motorrad early on were a big one for me. I
Oh
find like
yeah,
especially
big
like this
fan.
that song, yeah, that song Therapy really just knocks me for six every time. I posted one in the Discord as a Hink Step song. It's called Not Dead Just Forgotten. It's got this arp that comes in. It's like it's an arp that hits like a drop without like kicking in the face with bass. It's just this melody that just yeah, like so Hink Step is one. I've got a couple written down here, like Emancipator. He's got a couple of
Oh yeah, yeah,
again, yeah,
Emancipator. They're
yeah,
great.
yeah,
They're great.
yeah. You know the violin in that song Anthem. Like when that hits, like that kicks me in the chest every
That
time.
that might have been Rena Jones. She's been playing on a bunch of their stuff. Like she's been doing like cello and other strings.
Wow, shit. Okay.
Yeah, she's a homie of mine from Portland, Oregon. She's really good. I've known her for like decades, but yeah, I know she's been recording with them a bunch. But yeah, I don't know that particular part of that song, but getting and I don't want to play any copyrighted material on this because it's a whole thing when you play copyrighted songs on YouTube. It's a whole thing. But that's okay, cool. So keep going. Let's talk about more songs, because I know the Moderat one. I don't know that particular song. And which like Porter Robinson songs are the ones for you, and what moment in those songs?
Oh wait, there's one in particular. I'm fucking terrible with song names. Hang on, sorry.
I really like that one Virtual Self track, the big one off that first Virtual Self record. And there's a new Virtual Self record he's working on too. I don't know. It's I saw him teasing it.
I haven't followed him that closely, you know. I've
Yeah.
listened to all of the stuff on Spotify, and there's like a select few songs that I made a playlist out of that really got like they worked for me, you know. They really got me like feeling stuff. Like Divinity is definitely one which has that again, I seem to like I feel like I like melodies that hit like a drop. So you have this kind of big
Yeah.
chord progression build up, and then it's like you're expecting like it to be kicked in the face with like bass, but it's actually just this like epic melodic harp or synth or whatever sound that's just like beautiful.
Great.
Sad Machine is another one that I think is
Yeah.
really good by Porter Robinson.
Yeah, that one's really good.
Something Comforting. I think that's got really nice vocal
Okay.
to it. Yeah, the ones I have here in front of me is Get Your Wish, Look at the Sky and Mirror. They're the other three that I have in front of me.
Okay, cool. All right, and then okay, so let's talk about non-electronic music. Have you achieved that same sort of an emotional experience with non-electronic music genres? And you know, if so, or like, are there any of the greats that you are particularly inspired by?
Funkadelic could be one band that I really like.
Any particular song?
Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts. Like,
Okay.
has to be straight up my favorite Funkadelic song. Yeah, that one changed me. Like the lyric, and that just rattled me into my core when I heard it for the first time. I like some folky stuff as well. I like some I don't Bob Dylan is coming to mind, but there's some Irish artists as well. Like Christy Moore's got a couple of like folky songs that I think when the storytelling aspect of the lyrics, when it's done well, I think that can be really powerful.
Okay. Cool.
And then, yeah.
Do you have any experience playing piano, guitar, or other instruments?
A little bit of experience playing guitar as a teenager, but I need to like practice a lot more, and I am going to buy a piano at some stage. I want to
Okay,
learn. So
cool.
yeah.
So right off the bat, just like before we get into too much more about style, and whatnot, I think you're gonna have to like learn melody, focus a lot more on melody. And I often will like especially with electronic music, one of the first exercises, and there is a recipe that like there's a few of the modules in the producer's path that go into a lot of detail on melody, but given that it is like a particular focus area of yours, I want to kind of like tell you a little bit of a heads up before and some stuff that you can do before. But like when you're composing melodically, right? When you're first like looking at a piano and you're thinking like, okay, so there's all these different modes of all these different scales, and it's really hard to remember, like, if you don't count in semitones automatically, it's like a lot of the time you're like, okay, well, what's 5 semitones up from that? And you're like counting on the keyboard, pressing the buttons and stuff. And it can seem like, how does anyone memorize all this stuff, But there's a system that, like, let's say you're a touring musician and you are the vocalist and you have these songs written, but you're not necessarily like flying a drummer and a drum kit from town to town. You may end up going to different towns that have like a perfectly good house band at certain venues that you're playing at, or like maybe your manager has set you up with some session players for a run or whatever, and you're in a situation where musicians have often found themselves in a situation where they may be playing on stage with people and it's the first time they're playing on stage with those people. How can you have like a crew of session musicians ready to go, and just hand things out? And a lot of the time, they're handing out sheets that are kind of like an abbreviated version of the music, and frequently that's notated in scale degree notations, and that's where you use Roman numerals 1 through 7 to represent each of the steps of this 7, because it's 8 to go to the octave, so it's 7 and then 1, right? So each step in a traditional 8-tone scale, right, would get a scale degree. And then those scale degrees, they all have triads. Like, let's say that you make like the claw, as they call it, where you have like the middle finger doing the third, the thumb doing the root, and then your pinky doing the fifth, right? You would make a triad, and that root note would be on your thumb. And if you move your claw up and down the scale degrees, you'll see that each like scale degree generates 2 additional notes in that scale. And then the chords of those scale degrees can either be major or minor, depending on which mode that you're in the scale, right? But if you want to learn a crash course on how to refer to them by scale degrees and how to recognize different scale degree intervals and how to recognize different scale degree chord progressions, I would recommend this course called Hook Theory. And they do such a good job with this PDF that I have no desire to like remake it, because like I don't, I try to contribute things that's like, I'm bringing something to make them better or improving upon it in some way. I don't want to just take other people's knowledge and represent it, so I don't feel the need to do that. I think that the Hook Theory have done such a good job of explaining theory in terms of like relative scale degrees, and there's like, they've become wildly successful with this, and there's like apps and games and all kinds of stuff, but really all you need is the first Hook Theory 1 PDF file. And it's like an interactive PDF file, and there's audio examples, and you can see the notes and like identify the intervals. And once you do that, right, you don't necessarily need to know scales and stuff super well as an electronic musician, because a lot of the, like, Ableton Push, for example, uses isomorphic scales where like it'll eliminate notes that are you're not going for. And then same thing with like A lot of keyboards have lights on them and stuff now, so that you can like program in a scale and say like, okay, only light up the notes in this scale. And as you're like transposing around, you can avoid generating any out of scale notes. But Ableton also has like this awesome new system where you can have one global scale at the top and it makes everything conform to that scale. So you don't really need to know all of the scales and memorize them like you would if you were playing a violin. As long as you go to Hook Theory, you can work your way through that PDF in probably like 2 hours, and then get that kind of idea of like, oh, this is like a 4-5-1 chord progression, or oh, this is the 6-4-1-5 chord progression, or whatever. There are these like kind of standard chord progressions that you hear again and again and again throughout all genres of music. 6-4-1-5 being like the main one, and that's like the chord progression from Pachelbel's Canon, which is like every pop song is that chord progression. But the reason why you get a lot of pop music that centers around 4, 5, and 1 chord progressions is like in C, right? Let's say I'm playing a major scale here. If I move my hand up and play the chord that's on the 4 or the 5, those are both going to be major chords. And if I'm in C minor, the 4 and the 5 are both minor. So while the 2 and the 3 and the 7 and the 6, they can kind of change depending on whether you're playing in like a major or a minor key. But the 4, the 5, and the 1, they're always the same type of chord as the root of your scale. So whenever you're transposing samples, for example, or transposing MIDI notes, that's why the magic numbers 5 and 7 semitones are what they are. Because if you go down 5 from a note, you get the 5th that is below. And if you go up 5 from a note, you get the 4th that's above, right? So 5 and 7, because for some reason, even though the 6th semitone would be half in between the octaves, it has a sound to it that you don't end up like hearing in a lot of chords. Like a lot of people will avoid the 6th semitone. So the 4th is like the 5th semitone and the 5th is the 7th semitone. But yeah, for some reason you don't get the 6th in a lot of scales. You get it in a blues scale and stuff, but you don't really get it that often. But yeah, anyway, the magic numbers are 5 and 7 for semitones. Start thinking about all your scales and stuff in terms of like scale degrees and work through the Hook Theory document. And if you've played guitar, a lot of that stuff is going to make sense. Like if it was like a Rick and Morty situation and like a giant alien head came down and was like, show me what you got. You and a non-musician have to figure out how to be in a band. I'm not going to have a non-musician playing drums. Like, I'm probably going to have to play the drums or we're not even going to have a band. So if I got to give the non-musician a guitar, I'm going to be like, listen, count the number of frets. You're just doing power chords. And we're doing like, 5, 7, 1, 5, 7, 1 all day long. And like, you're up and running. So power chords, like in guitars, it's pretty much all just like the number of frets, and then that's like the semitones, all right? And then you just make the one chord shape and move it up and down. But yeah, so just, some of that stuff is going to be familiar, but once you get that relative scale notation into your head, then really, like, as you kind of dissect your reference songs and try and like figure out what notes they're using, you'll probably find that those musicians are using perhaps some interesting inversions and stuff to make the chords not sound so basic. And, sometimes you get people will add like a 7th on top of the 5th of the chord, to make like a kind of jazzy chord. But honestly, a lot of the best chords are like 2 notes. They're not even necessarily a triad, and when, especially with composing electronic music, there's this tendency to put like 3-note triads every time you're trying to make a chord progression, because I don't know, you've just internalized that that's like a proper chord and that's like, you're supposed to do that. But a lot of the best and most impactful music that will have, like some of the chords will just be like octaves of a note, or like just like, the root and the 5th, or like the root and the fourth, and like that's it, you know? So don't be afraid of 2-note chords, because chords can be that simple. A lot of like Trent Reznor, for example, a lot of his chord progressions will be 2-note chords. They won't actually be triads. So don't, you know, yeah, because the tendency, especially when you start getting into it, is you just start like everything's got a 7th or a 9th or something in it, and then it just starts sounding like skip skiddy beep beep boo ba la ba bow ba bow bow skidoo, and you're like, why does this sound all like 80s and jazzy and shit? And it's because there's just, you know,
I'm so guilty of that. I'm so guilty of just stacking notes on top of each other, trying to get it to sound as big and as lush and as epic. And yeah,
well,
you're
you
right.
can have octaves of your 2 notes. I'm just saying it's like a triad is 3 notes within an octave and then transposed, however. But I guess it would be a dyad would be 2 notes. If triad is, I think it would be a dyad. It's not a duoad, so it's got to be a dyad. But yeah, just 2 notes. 2 notes is plenty. And if you need more keyboard, just octaves of those notes. And then there'll be a lot of melodic techniques and stuff in there. But, you know, the more you can get references of like, okay, what was that melodic moment that flipped the switch? Let's get it into Ableton, figure out the notes on just like a stock piano sound until you've got the notes in. And then there's different websites that you can look up, like, what scale am I? And then you put in a bunch of notes and it's like, okay, you're either in this scale or this scale. Cause sometimes you don't have a definite answer. Like I have songs where people are like, what scale is this in? I'm like, I don't know. And like, I wrote it and it's like, you know, you could count it as this mode of this scale or this mode of this scale. I just know that the notes sound good, you know? And like theory is basically the academic attempt to understand why something that has worked. It's not like there's a proper way to do it and an improper way to do it. And like theory will write your music and then you just have to learn to play it, you know? And that's why like a lot of music, when people just have like a chord progression moving around and it's like doopy-dee, 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 doopy-dee. Like sure, there's music theory and there's notes and stuff, but you know, unless there's like a little more to it than just transposing a chord around with an arpeggiator, it gets kind of like, it just leaves you cold, you know?
Yeah.
So usually it's like breaking the rules and kind of like doing things a little differently and wonky that makes it work or not, you know, but really developing your sensitivity to that as things go is something that, you know, it just comes with time and with repetition. You'll know more like when you can break the rules after you've kind of like really dissected them. But yeah, getting all those moments together, you can look up often if a song is famous, if you look up the MIDI files, you can get the MIDI files online and take it apart. Ableton's audio to MIDI is pretty good, but if you're doing a track with drums and stuff, it's going to be like kind of a shit show. So you know, but you can also just like load up your piano, like how like anybody has done it in history, where you play the song and you just try and pick the notes out on top of the song playing. That's kind of the tried and true method that every genre of musician does it. But yeah, you're going to want to get those notes into the sequencer and really study like what kind of chords, because you know, there's certain people like, you know, like deadmau5 and Imanu and Mr. Bill, where they're often doing some pretty unusual things with their chords that maybe don't necessarily fit in with the kind of like, you know, like if you were trying to describe them in like a theoretical, like music theory, piano teacher sort of a way, I don't know if you really like it's kind of like, they're coloring outside of the lines, and it's like how they color outside of the lines that really make their chord progressions interesting. And like, you know, as you develop your skills, you may find, you know, having adjacent semitones in the middle of a chord can really make it a little more spicy. I often will do that. Like one of my favorite chords is just D, E, and F together, which I don't know how many, like, I don't think you can, I don't even know what that chord is called. I just know that when you hold a long chord of D, E, and F together, it sounds like you're in for some serious like UK breakbeat business at the end of that section, you know? I don't know. So don't get too hung up on the theory. Don't get too hung up on everything being triads. Don't get too hung up on doing things properly. Just try and get that like relative scale notation idea, like get a handle on that. And then when you're like looking up the music that you love, and the music that you love maybe doesn't perfectly fit this super simplified scale degree kind of idea, that's okay. You don't need a word to describe every last thing. The fit doesn't need to be perfect. As remember, all this theory is not proscriptive, it is descriptive, right? And, just kind of like notice, be like, okay, well, this chord is a triad, but then it does this weird thing at the end where two of the notes change. That's it. That's the thing to notice. You don't need to know like, oh, well, that's the Locrian mode or whatever. Like that shit doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Like I like everything I know about the modes, I've basically learned by accident. You just need to know that there are modes and that you can work within them. But like, no one's ever going to be like, you need to explain the difference between Lydian and Locrian mode, or else you're opening and not headlining. Like that will never happen. Okay. So don't even worry about it, but relative scale degrees, get that in mind, and then really try and like pick apart specific moments that have made that payoff, because you may, as you get their MIDI files out, you may find certain commonalities. Like, for example, I did not think that I liked music in major scales for a large portion of my life. I was like, major scales are for Windows 98. That's bullshit. Like I like sad or angry music on there. I'm a cool kid, And then like after learning about modes and how the different modes work together, I've realized that like a lot of the time I'll like a song that starts in a minor mode of the scale, and then without changing the notes of the scale, it kind of like parks its root note somewhere else for a while until it's long enough that feels like you're actually in a major scale. Now you're just in a major mode of the same minor scale that you were playing in before, but I often like songs with modal movements, and sometimes those big payoffs that I loved, I wasn't realizing that I was actually really into these like major moments. And yes, there are totally minor chords in major scales, and you can play pretty much any melody on just the white keys if you transpose the MIDI around, so like major scales aren't bad, minor scales aren't good, the scale degrees don't have to map perfectly, like it's just there to help, so don't worry about memorizing and shit, but just start getting a handle on that hook theory stuff, and you'll be like, oh, this hook theory document makes it so much easier to understand this, and really helps you to not get bent out, because it can go full whiplash. Like you watch a movie like Whiplash, you're like, that's what it's like learning an instrument. It's horrible. You get yelled at by bald angry men. But yeah. So that's, the more you can curate that list, because you already have a pretty specific idea of what you're doing, and that's great. And then, the rest of the course material is going to get you above the disqualification levels in like mixing and sound design and just, all that stuff that will be covered. And then there's a several week deep dive on melodies, like after we do mixing. Really just getting your reference material and taking it the hell apart. And then when you say nostalgic too, you're probably going to want to put extra effort into your curation of your Sparks folder, which are like song starts or seed ideas or whatever, and really try and get like a lot of Spark action in there that are going to be nostalgic, maybe like you like vocoders, but not all vocoders sound the same, and like maybe it's like the Texas Instruments voice chips from the Speak and Spell that you like. I'm obsessed with that particular voice chip. When I think of nostalgic, like robot retro electro voices, I usually, my head is going to Speak and Spell more than vocoder, but to someone who's like not really got in there, they might be like, oh, speaker, spell, vocoder, same thing. They're completely different, right? But just figuring out like what it is that you're nostalgic for, in what ways, how the artist that you're inspired by, in what ways is their music nostalgic, and are there like triggering audio things that you can collect and put into your Sparks folder that are going to give you that feeling and that like, that rabbit to chase as you go on these recipes and stuff. But yeah.
Sick. Thank you very much.
Okay, cool. All right. So now, Jacob, you are up next. If you could please unmute. Okay, so I want you to tell me as specifically as you can about what it is that you are trying to create.
Music.
That's it's not very specific.
So I like making a lot of progressive house. I would say mostly that, but I kind of like go through a lot of different genres and have a lot of different inspirations outside of the electronic music space. So I kind of mix those in and kind of go for whatever inspires me. Lately, I've been doing more kind of melodic house kind of stuff. But I kind of like that old school prog house style from like 2008, 2012. And like to mix that up with other things. So,
Okay, cool. So, in terms of, look, did you watch the other video from the other one, the other artist development session?
I skimmed it.
Okay. Did you check out the explanation of the book Positioning?
No.
Okay, so there's this guy, Al Rees, R-E-E-S, and he and his partner, whose name eludes me right now, they wrote a couple really interesting books about marketing that everyone should know. There's one about the immutable laws of marketing, which is awesome, and then there's another one about positioning. And brands and positioning are two related things. And when someone tells me that they're going after genre, right? Like, that's great. Genres are great. I love, I love working within certain genres, but to get more specific about like what it is that you're trying to do within that genre, it's a good idea to kind of be aware of how positioning works. So positioning refers to basically, where brands live in the mind of the public and in the mind of your audience. Is there will be a ladder that contains all of the hierarchy of brands in a given category. So like, let's say you have a luxury car category. There will be like, the most expensive and exclusive luxury cars that rule that category would be at the top. And as you go down, the cars get less luxurious, or at least the perception of those cars gets less luxurious until you're like the 10th position and people stop caring, right? So like people will have a kind of hierarchy ladder for most categories that has already been established. And it is very difficult to unseat the number one in a given category once that category has been around for a while. So, for example, turntablism, right? I really like turntablism. I find it pretty interesting. But if you talk to someone who has only a surface level knowledge of turntablism and you say, who's the best scratch DJ in the world? They're going to say Qbert. Now, Qbert was like the best scratch DJ in the world for several years running. It won the DMC 3 times in a row until they were like, here, take the golden turntables and stop competing. Give someone else a chance. But that was also in like 1997 or some shit, right? Like there's a lot has happened in the turntablism genre since then. And there are a lot of new turntablists who are using technology in really interesting ways that are pushing the art form far further than it was 25 years ago when Qbert kind of took that de facto best scratch DJ in the world position in most people's minds. And it's really hard for these new turntablists, even though what they're doing is like technically quite different from what Q*bert's doing, and they're a lot more juggle focused and less scratch focused, and many of them are doing video and like all these cue point juggles that you could only ever do in an electronic system. And you know, they're making like custom scratch records and Serato and like all this stuff. They're like kind of objectively taking the art far further. But because that category's been around for a while, it's like unless you're going to like fundamentally reinvent it, it's really hard to get that number one position. So really the best is where everybody wants to get in terms of owning a category is you want to be like a Walkman or Kleenex, where like the product name is synonymous with the category. Like most of the time you would say, pass me a Kleenex instead of may I have a tissue. Most people will not refer to them as like tissues. If there's a box and there's tissue sticking out of it, you call it a Kleenex, whether it's a Kleenex brand Kleenex or not, right? And that's kind of where you know your ideal position is as a brand. Now, you can define yourself as an alternative within a category, you know, and there's that famous like, you know, we're number 2, so we try harder category from Avis Rent-A-Car when they found that, Budget or whatever, the number 1 rent-a-car place, that they were just like, they had it on lock. So they built a campaign around being number 2, and that can work. But it's best to really own your own fundamental category, right? Or to reinvent a category such that it's distinctly different enough. And you can still do this in genres that have been around for like 30 years. Like Camo and Crooked, for example. That Mosaic album came out in like 2016 or something. That turned the drum and bass world on its head. Like they had a truly fresh style in a like 30-year-old genre, you know, but they questioned fundamental assumptions about that genre to make that, you know. And like drum and bass is a genre that is defined by chopping up breakbeats. It's built on chopping up breakbeats. And a lot of those kind of classic compositional techniques came from trackers and MPCs, where you're like cutting up or like looping little pieces of a loop. You might have like a bunch of forward chops and a backward chop that's 2 octaves higher, so it sounds like a rewind, and making patterns like that, right? And you know, a lot of these more modern drum and bass artists were like, okay, well, can we create the feeling of a breakbeat without actually having James Brown's Funky Drummer or the Amen break in every single song that we've made, you know? And they figured out ways to make the feeling of a drum break out of, you know, diverse volume envelopes on white noise, you know? Because think about like Super Mario. How do the drums go in that when you've only got general MIDI? It's like short burst of white noise is a kick, long burst of white noise is a snare, and then a little transient of white noise is a hi-hat. So you can have just white noise and go, and it sounds like a drum beat in Mario speak, you know, in a general, well, you can do that with just noise. You know, if you like carefully envelope noise and you have like an envelope where the length of the envelope is changing, you can create like the feeling of a running sampled breakbeat over to, and like, it's like, it would take a producer to really notice, oh, that's why that's like that. That's what they're doing, etc. But getting like the rules of the genre out of your head and onto paper and being like, okay, what are the things that everyone is doing? What are the things that are done differently from artist to artist? And what is nobody doing? And for you to have a fresh take on a genre and to stand out in a genre, you want to basically create like a style manifesto for yourself, where you have outlined very specific and rigid rules within which you will operate, which is how you establish any kind of a genre, right? whether it's a genre that you create or a genre that other people create. It's the creation, the intentional creation of that box to think inside of, that, provides that focus. And then when you are trying to stand out in a genre, you're going to want to try to identify some like fundamental thing that every single person in your genre is doing that is common to everybody in the genre, and then think, how can I achieve that? If the effect of that thing is necessary for it to still be the genre, for example, the effect of a running breakbeat in drum and bass, then you may want to investigate an alternative way to generate that same effect without doing the thing that is the necessary ingredient. But you could also be like, you know what? I'm just never going to use snare drums. It's always going to be a clap or a field recording or something. I'm just never going to use a snare drum. Not one in any of my songs. Fuck snares. That kind of like arbitrary limitation goes a long way towards making an artist seem fresh, because the things that make your music boring are the rules that you don't know you're following. The thing that makes your music boring is the rules you don't know you're following. And when you can find one of those and take musical advantage of breaking that rule, other people are going to go, oh, fuck, of course. And then they're going to try and sound like you, right? Because you've just pushed things forwards, right? So you want to figure out like, okay, who are the artists in my like pantheon of artists? What do these artists have in common? What are the elements that the genre has in common? And then even if it's arbitrary, even if you don't really hate snare drums, you want to come up with some kind of a rule, such as omitting snare drums, omitting drum breaks. Maybe your kick and your sub are always the same sound. Maybe you never use hi-hats or reverb. Maybe, you want to come up with some kind of a arbitrary rule that you're like, you know what, this rule, there's something to this. I like this rule. This is a rule that I could see myself like iterating many times on. And I'm not going to get bored of it. And I'm not going to be like, why did I say no snares? If only I had a snare, this song would be so much easier to finish, So it's got to be something that you feel like you fuck with enough to do it, right? So think carefully about that, because like the progressive genre is a wildly popular genre and has been for a long time. And there's a lot of really great music in that. There are certain things about the production aesthetic that I'll help you to get there. But in terms of developing your ability, you would definitely want to, follow the lead of your influences and develop your chops and your ability to reliably produce that genre on command. But then for developing your style, you're going to need to think of like, how can I do something new that is still recognizable as this genre? And if you can do something legitimately new within the box that has already been established by the culture, if you can do something new within that box, that's when you're really winning. And it's as much about what you're not doing as what you are doing. And most of the people whose music sounds the most distinct, who successfully break a rule inside of a box that everybody's been beating like a dead horse, usually the people who can show that there's still whole other infinite worlds inside of any box are the people who are pointedly not doing certain things. Right? Such as, do we need that many kick drums? Do we need sound X at all? Those are the kinds of questions to ask, right? So figure out like, what are the essential components of the genre, such that if you remove any one of those components, it is no longer that genre. And then think, okay, new way of making X. And then, can I get the effect of X without X? Right? And that's how you kind of push the genre forward. So when we come back, I want to talk about like how you would describe your music beyond it is an instance of a person in this genre. Because if that's what you're trying to do, get in line. You know, there's already thousands of people that are aiming right down the middle for genre. And you know who else aims right down the middle of genres? AIs. Like, if you want to do right down the middle of genres and just do an instance of form X, just go over to suno.ai, type that shit in. You'll get a perfectly workable version of it. Right? So like, if you want something that only you can do, you need to create your own category. Right? And it can be a subcategory, but it just needs to be distinct. And it needs to be something that you fuck with enough to make a lot of songs in that genre.
Yeah. Well, when I was mentioning genres, I didn't want to make it sound like I'm pigeonholing myself. It's actually like I kind of like fuck with that genre the most, and then everything else is just kind of like figuring out how I could combine the elements I like from all those genres within one genre or within something new that kind of represents my style, which is now, like you were saying, is my goal than anything else. But like I feel like I have to learn what's in the box before I can actually start mixing all those boxes together.
Yeah, we'll definitely explore that. But when you're composing a style versus like a particular piece of music, it's a little bit different. Like, you know, a song or an album can be about a topic or a feeling, you know, or a concept. Whereas a genre is kind of like, it's like the scene, and then the song or the topic or the emotion is like the character in that scene, you know? So let's say that we've established this progressive house genre as the scene. What happens on that stage? Who are the characters that are in that drama as it unfolds? Like, what are the, you know, are there characters? Are there emotions? Like, what are we exploring within that framework?
The way I would think of it is like the actors are the different elements within a song. So like, you know, you have your percussion, you have like your standard percussion, whatever, and then on top of that, another character could be like a top loop or something like that. Then you have
Well, what are the lead
bass,
elements?
chorus,
Is when I'm talking about the
lead.
character, I'm like, who's the star of the show? Who's the star of the show? Is it, you know, soaring free jazz style synth melodies? Is it weird glitchy micro house fragments? Is it like what, you know, what kind of lead elements do you like? You know, is the bass in the front? Is it vocals in the front? Is it synths in the front? You know, like when you're thinking like, okay, well, if you imagine your song as like a band and a singer, even purely instrumental music, you can imagine in that way and structure the focus in that way. So like, what's in the spotlight? If the genre is the stage, what's in the spotlight?
For me, usually I like leads. I like leads that sound like guitars. A lot of the time I find myself putting like amps and distortion on like various EDM patches.
Yeah, it's usually a
Um,
good move. Especially if
yeah,
you get
but
like, even like a shitty guitar pedal is going to be way better than software plugins most of the time.
right, yeah. And I was actually making a song at the beginning of the year, and I wrote it on like a MIDI keyboard, and then it sounded very floaty, like the patch I was using. And I was like, okay, I want to kind of develop this later on and kind of make it sound more gritty and aggressive. And like literally the first amp I put on, it was like a guitar rig amp.
Oh,
The first
guitar
one I
rig's excellent.
chose, yeah, it made it sound exactly like a guitar. And I was like, this is fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
So,
Try it on vocals too.
okay.
Yeah, guitar pedals on vocals is like one of the big hacks of music.
Okay.
Yeah, that often helps. And a lot of the time, like you know, like I don't know if you listen to the Apache Renaissance album, But if you listen to that album closely, a lot of the things that sound like a guitar part or a synth part, if you listen to it closely, it's actually just like a vocal with guitar distortion. Like maybe like outtakes or whatever that didn't get used to be like, oh, I like that melody, but let's just make it sound like a guitar with guitar pedals. But yeah, so distortion textures, guitar inspired melodies. This is definitely getting somewhere.
Yeah, those kind of things. My main thing with prog like house, I love the prog chords, like the 16th prog chords. Those are great. I like bass. I play bass.
What do you mean
I
the
like
16th, like gated?
There's the plucky
Oh, like
ones.
arpeggiators,
No, like plucky chords.
like gated chords.
They don't have to be gated, but I guess they could be.
Okay, so you're saying like plucky, steady, repetitive chords.
Just like 16th note pluck chords.
Okay. Do you know about the chord trigger mode on the Ableton arpeggiator?
Yeah, I use that sometimes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that fucking rocks like that. Especially when you take it off sync and you're like, I love the way that sounds. I do it all the time.
Yeah, it's sick. That I like I was saying bass. Depending on the song, like if there's room for it, then I like to go for something funky with bass, but sometimes the lead and the funk don't really mix together. What else?
How about percussion? Are there
Percussion?
non-standard drum machine sounds involved?
Lately more and more I've kind of been diving into more and more loops. And more like kind of rock loops and loops outside of the space of EDM and kind of putting those into songs. I like the really rock aesthetic. Like before I really got into EDM and electronic music, I was more into rock.
What kind of
So a
rock
lot of
bands did you listen to?
so Chili Peppers, Chili Peppers and the Black Keys were my big two before, but like after that, so much like I got into metal, I got into like old metal, new metal, everything in between, a lot of kind of like funk stuff, a lot of classic rock. I was really into Cream, a lot of blues, like not just blues rock, but a lot of like old blues. Like
Did you ever study like guitar or piano?
I started playing piano as a kid. Um, didn't like it very much, like the education part of it. But it did give me a good foundation on like notes and everything.
Because
I
this
still
the
have
scales degree thing, the scale degrees thing is especially a big deal in blues. You know, especially like the 8-bar blues pattern and the 12-bar blues pattern. It's like they're like these really set chord progressions that a lot of like rock and subsequent genres kind of
like
borrowed from blues. But that like knowing how those interact with the scale degrees that I was talking about earlier with the hook theory thing, definitely do the hook theory thing if you haven't done that already. But it's like it's probably the best way to just like get a handle on scale degrees. But yeah, a lot of those bands like Led Zeppelin, for example, like they like considered themselves like a blues band, you know, and like Cream and stuff, like a lot in the early like rock days before it was like, you know, rock and heavy metal were words. They would be like, oh yeah, we're just like a really heavy blues band, you know, like a lot of their best songs are like covers of old blues songs and stuff. They're just like way more distorted and they have screaming in them. But yeah, studying how like those kind of progressions work and scale degrees, and then a lot of like those sorts of rock bands, they really make you wait to resolve the cadence, which is where you go from the like fourth or fifth step of the scale to the root, and when you're like hanging out at that fourth or fifth chord, the audience like subconsciously they know that that one chord is coming, and like the longer you draw that out and the longer you make them wait for that one chord that they want, the more crazy it makes people. And like a lot of the best like Beatles songs would do that too, but a lot of that like kind of classic rock stuff, there will be like sections where that section is kind of like almost operating in a mode, like it's been at the 4 and the 5 chord long enough that it's like, and like those 12-bar blues patterns too, like, you know, you'll start at the root playing the 1 chord, and then you'll play the 4 chord for like 4 bars, and then go back down to the 1. you know, and then be like 4 4 4 5 5 5 1, and that's like the resolve on a lot of those. But that like 4 4 4 5 5 5 4 4 4 5 5 5, a lot of rock is from drawing out the 4 5 4 5, like going back and forth like on the 4 and the 5 and making people wait for the 1. So a lot of those melodies are kind of like based on that. A lot of what makes that sort of melodic structure interesting is based on that. I'd also like encourage you, because like prog music, and one of the things that I think is really great about that and like techno and that whole aesthetic is the exploration of like stasis rather than like constantly, you know, like dubstep is like ADD, like here's something new, here's something new, here's something new, here's something new. Whereas like, you know, house and techno and prog and a lot of other kind of like, you know, traditional synthesizer music is all about really like, you know, finding something that's like a place that you want to stay and like stretching that shit out. And generative techniques such as using randomization to turn notes off and on in the Ableton piano roll. You can like assign note probabilities. So you have like your main notes hit every time, but all the ones on the like upbeats and 16th notes and stuff, those maybe hit some of the time. And then as the melody loops, it doesn't quite loop the same way twice, right? That will enable you to kind of create a lot of that progressive feeling that where you're like in one chord for like an extended period, and it's kind of like riffing within that chord, but not, you know, not entirely repetitious. Right. And like those long, slow movements of like filters slowly opening up, or like an envelope with like the beginning of the riff, the envelopes are all short and tight. And then you get like 16 bars of that loop later, all the envelopes have these long decay phases on them, you know? So listen carefully to how the artists that you like are holding stasis and like making something that is sounding, that is essentially the same chord and the same drum pattern over and over again, but how are they creating a narrative within that by like opening up filters, opening up envelopes, etc., to kind of like, and then working with randomization. And then if you ever want to make a random value, a lot of the time, if you take an LFO and you put it on the little city, which is like the random sample and hold mode, just put it on retrigger, and then with the speed all the way down. And most synths are samplers because you're getting, LFO is what's called a sample and hold circuit, where you have noise, which is like making every frequency. And then when you sample and hold, you're like, here's the trigger, and it grabs a random value out of that noise and then holds it. Right? Hence the term sample and hold. So random and sample and hold are often used interchangeably. And that's what that city represents. When you look at the LFO shapes, the random LFO is usually represented by a city. Well, that city, it represents sampling and holding a random value at whatever interval, right? So because you only want one random value, you don't want the LFO to be scrambling that parameter constantly. You just want one note on, one random value. So you put it all the way slow on retrigger, and then you get a random value when you press a note, but no other time, right? So in your synths and samplers and stuff, you can do that. And then in the Ableton expression control device, it's one of the Max devices that is like a modulator that you can map. And one of the options in that is random. And that gives you a new random value with each note press, right? So if you map small amounts of randomness around your patches, that goes a really long way. Like that goes a really, really long way. You might randomize the decay time on an envelope. You might randomize the filter offset between left and right ears. You might randomize the filter frequency, sure. You might randomize the, you know, whatever else. And then also you can use the velocity device and put a little bit of random on the velocity. And then there's one called the Max Humanizer that you can get from Max for Live that allows you to randomize timing offset. And then each note is a little bit either late or early by like 10 milliseconds or something. And then that can kind of break up that like super repetitious, like this is like bad repetition versus good repetition. A lot of the time it's like little bits of randomness. So like probability on the notes, random values being generated with each note press. And a lot of the time when you get those like really sick, like repeating chords, if there's like a little bit of randomness each time that chord repeats, you get, it starts to make things sound a lot more interesting, especially if you have like a random amount of detune that's like half a semitone of detune. It's just randomly applied, because on a chord, you're going to get all three notes are each going to get their own random detune. Right. And then that gives you like that, like really rich kind of nostalgic synth sound, because everything is like a little bit out like an analog synth. But yeah, so start exploring randomness, and stasis, right? And just think about like, because a lot of prog stuff, it's like the chord changes are coming nice and slow, really slow chord changes. But check it out in the like you're going to want to get like a few songs, like the reference playlist thing is a really big deal. And then the Sparks folder, like I can't stress enough how important it is to curate the Spark or Seed collection, where you have all these ideas or sounds or whatever, where as soon as you like perceive that idea, you're like, I can hear the whole rest of the song. Fuck, I know just how that needs to go. Right? You want to pay attention to stuff that gives you that feeling, because that certainty about where you're going with the project, that is really the criteria upon which you establish whether something is or is not the right move at any given point. And the more clear you can be in your vision of your style, as well as the vision of the emotion or topic that you're exploring at any one time, the more clarity you have on that, the easier the creative process is, right? So definitely assemble a lot of reference material, and you're going to want to have, like, in addition to the genre, you're going to want to have an emotional palette. Like, there will be emotions that you explore well, and there will be emotions that you do not explore well as much. And there are like, an artist will have kind of like a range, like an emotional range, usually, where there's like a range within which you're like in your comfort zone. And then outside of that range, it doesn't like, can you see like Lana Del Rey doing like a heavy metal song and like screaming and headbanging? Like, no, it doesn't mean she's a bad musician. That's just not what she does. In addition to her genre, there's also like an emotional range that she has. Right. So when you're defining how you're going to operate within a genre or whatever, being like, hey, I like to explore melodically with melodies that sound like this. I like to explore these sorts of emotions. Listen to my music when you want to feel this. That within a genre will help you to define too. But yeah, definitely, like, if you're going to list genre first, it's got to be like you move right past it to the good stuff, because genre is like, okay, well, I make these genres, but I explore this with my music, so keep in mind, that other dimension is really what we're after when I come back around. Okay. All right. Awesome. So, Josh, you are up, my friend. Tell me about the music that you are trying to create.
All right. First off, thanks for putting this together, man. This is awesome.
My pleasure.
And when it comes to the music I put together, so far, I think it's been a bunch of like random genres that I put together. But one thing that seems to be consistent is just like a heavy, wide bass line. Doesn't necessarily have to be gritty, but I noticed that every song I just have some type of ridiculous bass going on in there. And I feel like that's definitely one of the key constant things that I bring throughout my music. So I'm big on either like you want to dance or you want to cry. It's like it's either one or the other. And I feel like the thing that I do the most, which I don't know if it's good or not, but I'll just take like one half of the song, then the second half is almost going to be like a different song, and then put them together as the third part of the song to end it out.
Yeah,
But
that can
that's
work.
you have to
I've
use
got
it.
lots of songs like that. That's a great strategy.
Yeah, man. I don't know if it's ADD or what, but I remember showing my friend my music. He's like, "Dude, you always do this. It's hilarious, but it's great." Yeah, so I feel like that's basically it, and I pull kind of like sounds or like what's the word I'm looking for? Just songs that I look for. Like I love a Juna Deep, so Jacob might know Juna Deep since he loves progressive house. So I love that vibe, especially like Knox Vaughn too, because he gets like dirty with it. So it's like it can be progressive house and like melodic, but he has these like deep, dark, bassy sounds that I fucking love. But then I also like the simplistic side of things too. So like I don't want to have too many crazy noises or anything like that. I like the sounds that are in there to be simple, but like they hit hard. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, and that just makes you think of like Bill Withers,
Nice.
1970s in Africa. He plays like what's that song? Happier, like Hope She'll Be Happier with him or whatever. And it's like three notes, but it's like the most powerful thing I've ever heard because it's just like the presence of it is great. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Sick. Yeah, melodic sounds treated rhythmically is one thing that I think it's just it always works. Like if you even if you take one or two notes, if you treat it if you're like, okay, this is a percussion instrument, you know? Because like you only
Right.
have one note on a lot of drums, but that doesn't mean you can't make them very expressive, right? So,
Right, right.
but yeah, treating melody as percussion and like especially with techno music, like I like to sequence everything as though it were percussion, you know. Okay, so how about in terms of like sound palette? Do you like a cleaner palette? Do you like you mentioned that you like dirty bass and stuff, but
Yeah.
how about drums and stuff? Like what kind of percussion sounds do you like? What kind of rhythms do you like?
A lot of times it's a hard snare and then kind of like mixing and matching different hi-hats that I put together. And then sometimes I'll throw in some vocals in there too, depending on the
As
song type that I'm
percussion?
doing. Well, not as percussion, yeah, just as part of piece of the
Okay,
song.
so other than kicks and snares and hi-hats, what other kind of
Mhm.
percussion sounds?
I mean, I guess it really depends on the song I'm making. I'm definitely doing bongos sometimes, definitely doing toms. It depends on the song. Like the last song I made was definitely just like a four on the floor house song with a heavy bass line and and a bunch of bongos, and then just like a chopped up vocal. And that was like a nice, simple, easy, but like good song that I really liked.
Okay, cool. So if you had like a pantheon of like, your like dream artists that you're like this person, I can't get enough of this. Like, who are the kind of artists in your pantheon?
Yeah, definitely. So Tom Mish is definitely one of my top ones because he's just like this very funkadelic. He does hip hop, but then he'll do like some feels music, and the guitar he uses, I think it's like a Fender Stratocaster or something like that. Super groovy, but then he puts it in hip hop too. So like his range of just emotion to then hip hop and to that along those lines, I really like. And then again, like Knox Vaughn was a great one. Bonobo is like another really good one too that I really like. So kind of putting those all together. And then there's also like elements of just that more like emotional side of using vocals and melody. Like I was watching the video of the Remix Your Life, like the entries, and like Nanaban, I think he's the one that won. And like that song with the vocals, like I really dug, and like that's definitely something that I'm trying to do also, or put into my music as well.
Okay, cool. Cool. All right, so I want to talk a little bit now about analyzing the style of the artists in your pantheon, and this kind of like applies to all of you, right?
Mhm.
So if you want to think about something as kind of like nebulous and vague as artistic style, just like as if you want to think about a subjective domain like music mixing, you know, you need to establish some kind of an objective frame of reference to be able to think critically and analytically about things that are inherently subjective. I often get questions like, how loud should my kick drum be? And people just want me to tell them a number that they can look at on the meter and they could go, yep, that's how loud it should be. But a kick drum in like, like a Jewel song might be a very different volume than a kick drum in a Noisia song. You know, they're very different artists with very different creative goals. They're both using something that could be called a kick drum, but which level is correct, right? Well, you know, if you specify a frame of reference, within that frame of reference, you can be like, okay, well, if I'm trying to make ripping neurofunk drum and bass, here's like a bunch of the best tracks in that genre. I know they translate across all sound systems. Let's listen to all their kicks. Okay, I guess that's how loud a kick needs to be in this genre, right? So you can approach learning to mix that way, and that's how we're going to approach it in the rest of the course. You know, we're gonna assemble some very meticulously kept reference playlists and think about them analytically. But I want you to apply that same sort of a framework to thinking about style. There are different dimensions of style that once you specify what the extremes of a spectrum are, you can probably come up with like a numerical value to represent where artist X exists on that spectrum of that dimension. And the dimensions that you're going to be thinking of, they will likely be, you know, a little bit idiosyncratic to you. It's not like there is some like absolute list of all of the style dimensions you can think in, right? And really the evolution of style is often people who are like, none of you even thought of this dimension. And then there's a new style. That's something that was off limits and wrong and bad becomes edgy and cool. And then it becomes a bandwagon. And then it becomes normal. And then it becomes boring. And then it becomes uncool and passé. And it's like, that's every genre, you know, like jazz music that you hear in an elevator now could once get you disowned by your Christian parents. You know, and it's like, it just sounds like a bunch of old guys going like, to me now. Like, I'm like, but then, like I heard Rage Against the Machine in a McDonald's bathroom when I was on a road trip. I was like, how is this? And it was killing in the name too. I'm like, there's swearing in this. Like, how is this in a McDonald's bathroom right now? But, you know, that's the evolution. Things that are edgy and off limits become, you know, the defining factors of a new style, and then they become a bandwagon, and then they become boring, and then blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, you can come up with your own dimensions, and I encourage you to come up with your own dimensions. But some dimensions that I like to think about is, you know, how ordered or chaotic you know, an artist's style is. Some people have a very ordered style. Some people have a very chaotic style. And then there's also like, you know, how the compositional density, right? How many sounds are present in the typical composition from those artists, and do they vary the compositional density? You know, there are some artists where the number of sounds in their song at all times is as many as can fucking fit. And then there are other artists where the number might not exceed 3 ever in any of their music, right? So compositional density and then how dynamic is the compositional density? You know, do they change compositional density a lot, or is it pretty stable? Right? So that's another dimension. How on the grid or off the grid their timing is, right? You know, are they using things like track offsets to make only the hi-hats late or only the kick late, but not everything else, right? Do they use a hard quantize where everything is mathematically perfect, or does it sound like the parts were played by hand? You know, how on grid or off grid are their rhythms? And if off grid, in which ways are they off grid, right? So, you know, how on grid or off grid they are rhythmically. And then there's also in tune, out of tune, right? There are some genres like chiptune music, for example, where you almost only ever hear perfect A440 standard 12 tone equal temperament, like exactly what you'd expect, general MIDI, perfect pitch all the time in every song. And then you have artists like Boards of Canada, where everything is a little bit bendy and out of tune all the time. Or like, a punk rock band, it can sound a little weird when punk rock bands are too perfectly in tune, right? So there's in tune, out of tune. And then there's also microtonal, does this artist explore non-12 tone equal temperament scales? If so, how do they do it? And then detune. So it's like, there's detuning, there's, pitch standardization, right? And then there's microtonal, right? And there are many other possible ways to tune instruments in the 12 tone equal temperament scale. And, a lot of sound design people will like to use the harmonic series, the notes of the harmonic series to build chords instead of the notes of the 12 tone equal temperament scale. Because when you have sine waves that are all part of the same harmonic series going into clipping or saturation, they'll be perfectly stable because they're exact integer multiples and they're not like the kind of compromise that we have when we make a chord, because the harmonic series, the intervals, like the octaves of the harmonic series, they're perfectly in tune, but the other notes, the in-between notes, may not be in tune with the piano. So, a lot of like sound design music will explore the harmonic series, but how in tune or out of tune, I would say put that down as a dimension. And then, where is the focus? Like, who is the audience of this music? There's some music, like, for example, Aphex Twin, where you get the vibe that Aphex Twin is the audience for Aphex Twin. He kind of doesn't really give a shit about what you think. And that's fine. That's how he makes great art. And then, there are other artists that are creating for an audience, very intentionally, and they're doing a really good job of it. Like Amy Winehouse's music, for example, is very much like, she's trying to make like music that people will like in a fairly standard set of rules, and she's breaking her rules within that, but like, a lot of her music's like pretty heavily influenced by like Motown and soul and stuff, and like a lot of the kind of compositional structures sound like they could have been made 50 years before she came out, but she brought her own flavor to it, and like really, but it was like very much like, hey, I want to make music that people who are fans of this type of music it's going to just fuck them up. They're going to love it, So who is this music for? Like, is this for the individual creator? Is this for an audience? How much does that creator take into account their audience when they're creating, etc.? Visual branding, there are artists that really care about that, and their music, like a band like The Antwoord, for example, it's like the visual branding was as much a part of their art as any audio was, and same thing with the music videos are as much a part of their art as any individual song, right? So like, what is the approach to visual branding? How important is that to that artist? Like Jay Dilla, you never really see what that dude looks like, but his fucking style, his musical style, we're all talking about it years after his death, So it's not like there's a correct or incorrect answer to anything here. These are just like a dimension upon which to place different artists when you're talking about their individual styles. So figure out what dimensions you would like to measure artists on. But I think like, timing, tuning, sound palette, visuals, audience, what emotions, write down a short list of emotions that this artist is likely to explore in their music, etc. What instruments do they use? How is the music made? Because, if you like IDM and breakcore and stuff, you're not really going to be able to study those genres without studying like tracker music, and like how old school software like Impulse Tracker and Mod Plug Tracker and Fast Tracker and all that like influence the style. And even drum and bass, like there wouldn't be drum and bass without like chopping up drum loops in a tracker to make like breakcore and stuff, like that the sound of that type of sequencing is this part of the sound of that genre, right? So when you're checking out these different artists, think like, be like, hey, are these people using analog synths? Are they using only a DAW? Do they like modular? Do they like hardware samplers? Do they play the guitar? Etc. So figuring out which instrument palette they're using is important as well. And then like how organic or electronic is their sound palette? That's another really good dimension, because I mean, one of the primary differences between like house and techno is how organic the sound palette is. If it's entirely machine noises, it's probably techno. If it's entirely organic noises, it's probably house. There are, of course, exceptions to this, but in general, that's a trend in those two, what distinguishes those genres. But just like, try and rack your brain and think of like once you have your pantheon of artists, think of how many different dimensions you can put down. And then you want to make just like Dungeons and Dragons style character sheets, where you're like, what is the score in these dimensions? And if some of the dimensions, like what instruments do they use, are not fully encapsulated in a number, just put a short paragraph or whatever, it's just, these are just notes for yourself. But then when you have all of those things together, right, then you can look at them and be like, okay, so, what are the common factors here? And you should try to include some, it's a good idea to analyze, like when you're trying to make a specific subgenre of electronic music, you're going to want to have a reference playlist that is like, 10 or 20 tracks that are extremely specific in what they're about, to be able to help you to assess things like how you want to mix that genre, and are there perhaps any compositional conventions that you could be hip to. But when you're building your pantheon of artists and you're thinking about like what greatness is in your esteem, you want to be like focusing on greatness as such, regardless of genre. There might be a visual artist or two on there that you're particularly inspired by, or an actor or something. And as long as there's something about what they do that can be, thought of in a similar dimension to what the dimensions are that you're analyzing styles in, they can be brought into that conversation. And it's a good idea to have some people who are like, the greats of all time greats on your list here when you're thinking about style, because the music that is timeless, right? A lot of that has to do with style. Like, is this person a leader or a follower in terms of style? Has this person created anything truly iconic that, anyone can do X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh, you're being this, like there are definitely, there are like, or it's like if you have visual style, person with good visual style is easy to draw, So like, think about it in terms of like, what, like, because the style, it's like a good joke, it shouldn't require too much explanation. Like good music too. Like someone who listens to your music should be able to basically spontaneously generate the same couple sentences you might use to describe it. They should be able to write those sentences more or less just from listening to your music. All right. Okay, cool. So now I want to come back around to Phil. All right. So Phil, you're now pinned to the front. Cool. All right. So now what I want to do now is like a little, kind of hypothetical thought exercise here. All right. I want you to imagine that some time has passed, maybe 5 years, 5 years from now. And you've been really working hard on your music, been having fun with it, putting your heart into it, exploring, finding deeper levels of self and deeper levels of artistry. And all the things on your artistic to-do list, they're now complete. You've done all those things and you're going around the world with your head held high, knowing that you are a musical badass. You've done all the things. You have a body of work that you love and that other people love. And you're going to go visit one of your friends in, you know, they live like on the second from the top floor of a really fancy building downtown. You're going to a cocktail party. You're ready to go to a party. You're all decked out. You get in the elevator. And then who is the number one artist in your artist pantheon? Your biggest inspiration?
I'm going to say Hinkstep.
All right. Well, Hinkstep walks into that elevator and presses the floor just above yours. And then the elevator doors close, leaving just the two of you. They look you up and down, assume correctly that you must be a musician, and start asking you what your music is all about. And the numbers start going, and you have at most 60 seconds, probably more like 30, to give them a compelling reason why they should remain interested in you and your music when those elevator doors open again.
Yeah, I'm going to say I make melodic, emotive, psy-based music for festival looks, Wonder Junkies, and potty rhythm fetishists. Probably inspired mostly by the likes of yourself, but also OTT, Emancipators, Solar Fields, Chipper, Colin Sound. Sometimes I also like to dabble in upbeat styles like glitch hop and Eurofunk. Mostly I like to tickle people's brains with psychedelic ear candy, and I like to grab them by the pit of their stomach with chord progressions and then drop melodies to push them over the edge of catharsis.
Mic drop. Dude, that was awesome. That was the most succinct and like the direct answer. Like, I know exactly what you're trying to do. I'm down. I want to hear it now. That worked. Okay, fucking pass that one with flying colors. All right. Well, that's great. Okay, so Josh, you are up next. Same scenario. Who's the artist on the top of your list?
Gotta follow the best answer of all time, man.
Yeah, that was really clear. That was
really good, man. Props.
That was a bang up answer.
Someone comes in the elevator to me, top artist. I tell them what I have to say. I'll be like, man, you put on my music, you're either going to have the stankiest of stank faces, or you're most likely just going to want to sit in a room with your emotions and think about life again. And that's going to include heavy bass lines, nice melodic riffs, clean, simple sound, and nothing too crazy or chaotic.
Okay. I think you could be a little bit more clear about it.
Yeah.
And it's often good to think like, you know, like when the kind of classic, like if you go to any of those like band PR courses or whatever, they're always like, when they're telling you to come up with your elevator pitch, because that's what this is called. You know, the kind of classic recipe is like, oh, it's like Sheryl Crow and Tom Petty got in a drunken fist fight in a Mexican kitchen, you know? And you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is so annoying to describe music like this. And like every time anyone's ever explained their music to me in that way, I'm like, this person is not someone whose music I need to listen to. You know, that's usually like just cringe, right? So, but it's like, it's cliche for a reason, because it does work to describe music. You can usually give someone a pretty good ballpark of where your music lands, right? But I like to approach this exercise in a different way, because music is medicine. It quite literally is. And for example, like group drumming therapy once a week produces a similar reduction in anxiety and depression symptoms long-term to taking antidepressant drugs. It's as effective as pharmaceuticals for treating things like psychological conditions, right? So now I'm not saying that you should never take drugs or that it's a replacement for drugs, and I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just saying there have been some very promising studies, and the science is very real. Like art therapy is a real thing. Music therapy is a real thing. Like music is medicine. It certainly helped me to become a productive member of society, and I owe that debt to music forever. Okay. So music is medicine, but just like medicine, there's not one drug that you can take for everything. You can't just pour Robitussin on it, like there's other drugs. You need to have different drugs for different purposes. All right. So if you're imagining your music as medicine for the soul when you are describing it, then you can kind of think about it like a pharmaceutical pitch. I make adjective music for group of people who want to objective. Right?
Mhm.
So that kind of a formula, right? That kind of a is a more appropriate kind of a formula for music, And you'll note that was the formula Phil just used for his mic drop answer. So yeah. So if you're thinking about your music in that way, like I would say, for me, I make kind of like music for like people in the like nerdy underground people who like to get weird and dumb with really loud sound systems. Like, it's like for basically like for like nerds, weirdos, hipsters, artists, etc. to go cut loose somewhere loud with a group of similar people. That's usually the itch that my music is scratching, weird sound system bass music for nerds, to go party with their nerd friends. That's basically it, it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But that's like, that would be, or like, I often really like making like pretty festival sunrise music, beautiful festival sunrise music for, that's similarly answers those pharmaceutical pitch type questions, right? So if you imagine your music is a drug, who's taking this drug? How does it make them feel? Why do they take it, etc.?
So I guess thinking of it as a drug, I think what I would want my experience to be would be to make people feel like a plethora of emotions and to feel like they're on a roller coaster or they're taking a journey, right? So, like I said, I like to blend through different genres. So my ideal audience or someone who wants to take that drug or someone who wants to be there is someone who doesn't want to be like a purist, like to one song or like to one type of genre, like, oh, I'm here for the house, I'm here for the drum and bass. Like I want someone who's going to be there to like be able to explore those different genres and even be open-minded to songs they or just styles they didn't even know that they would even like, right? So to be like kind of like that roller coaster drug of like, holy shit, where am I right now? And then it's like, oh, this is awesome. It's like, wait a minute, this just happened. So like those kind of people who are more experimental and more open-minded to those types of things.
Okay, but that is less specific than before.
Oh man.
Right? Because the thing, okay, like let's say like the brands that are the most powerful and the most successful feel like they create a Disneyland in your mind, right?
Right.
Like you can imagine a Tim Burton theme park if I just say those words together. You know exactly what that motherfucker looks like, right? So like when you have a single unified style that fills the entirety of the work, it is natural for the mind to imagine that that style continues past the borders of the work. Whereas if your style is a patchwork quilt of infinite variety, imagining what goes on beyond the borders of the canvas is work for the audience. Right? So while it is cool to be genre agnostic and to use a diversity of rhythmic structures, because that's essentially what electronic music genres are, what BPM and kick and snare pattern is this drum beat, right? That's usually how it's classified for DJs, while we're moving more and more past that. So genres are becoming less defined by that. And, you know, even the genre feels. What BPM is? Feels. Right? Could be any number of BPMs. You know, things are like different now. So, you know, it's fine to have a diverse number of genres under your umbrella, but what is the unifying thread? That's the question. What is the unifying thread? I make lots of different kinds of music that gives people lots of different kinds of emotions. Could be literally fucking anything.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the unifying thread, I think what I mentioned before is that heavy wide bass line, right? It doesn't need to be gritty, but unifying would be the heavy bass line, but also simplistic sound, not chaotic, in time and more structured, but having that deep, heavy sound within all of those songs.
Okay. And, you know, when I go to a concert, like let's say I go see Lauryn Hill. I really like Lauryn Hill. I've seen her play a lot of times. She's awesome. Just don't make her mad. But I've seen her lots of times, and her set, she'll play reggae songs, she'll play soul songs, she'll play rap songs, she'll play all different kinds of songs. But when I'm on that emotional roller coaster, most of the time the emotion is, fuck yeah, this concert is great. I'm really having fun here. This is awesome. So it's not really that much of a roller coaster, you know? It's basically like different ways of being like, hey, this is rad, you know? So it's not like, it's like, I mean, there are some, occasionally there'll be like a sad song that is noticeably sad, whereas the other ones are more festive. But in that kind of context, you know, like, because I mean, having like the songs where you have a good cry, there is a role for those in a live set on occasion. But in terms of like, what are people getting out of this? Like, why do people buy a concert ticket when your name is on the flyer, at the top of the flyer? It's your show. You're in charge of everything. They're paying to feel X. What is X?
Right. I think it's definitely kind of that same fuck yeah feeling of just like fuck yes, this is exactly what I want, and feeling happy, energetic, and ready to fucking move and have this experience with their friends.
Okay, so this is party music.
Yeah.
Dance music, party music. Okay, what kind of party is it?
In what sense?
Like, is it indoors? Is it outdoors? What kind of
Outdoors.
people are
Yeah,
there?
let's fucking do outdoors.
Okay, so this means like music festivals. Does this include squat parties and break-ins?
I don't know about squad parties and break-ins now. I don't know about
No.
all that.
Okay. Does this include illegal events of any kind?
Oh, I would absolutely be down for that for sure.
Okay. And how about the sound systems? What, like, is this like sound system snob music, or is this like, you know, DIY fucking get your scrappy friends out and fucking go throw a party under a bridge?
I mean, I could do either or. I'm down for either one. I don't need to be snobby about it or like this is the only system I'm going to play on or anything like that. I just want it to be heard and for people to say fuck yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, what is the payoff of the music? Like when the music hits and it's scratching that itch for people, what's that moment
For them or for me?
in the music? What is that moment in the music that delivers that hit?
Usually the bass line, man.
Okay. So it's the bass lines. Okay. So then, cause it sounds like you're, especially with the emphasis on like minimalism and order and stuff, it sounds like this is like maybe sustained focus music as opposed to ADD music.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say sustained focus on different, like, on specific sections, right?
So would the adjective deep be appropriate?
Yeah, deep could be one of them. Yeah.
Okay. So you've got deep, you've got bass, you've got party.
Hmm.
These are all good things. You've got outdoors, which is also good. How about demographics? Is this like scene stirs? Is this like, you know, can everybody enjoy this music? Like, do you need to be a producer yourself, or is this like music for, who are the people?
Yeah, I think definitely partly producer, because there's times where I'll make like minimal changes that sometimes just regular users won't, or yeah, regular listeners won't really appreciate in a sense. But
You can describe
definitely,
them as users in this conversation because music is a drug in this conversation.
yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Yeah, so I think it's like a combination of both, but not necessarily to where it needs to be like super popular to where everyone needs to enjoy it, but like in that electronic scene, like it could be a combination of people.
Okay, cool. Um, you also use the word catharsis.
Catharsis.
Yeah, when you were talking about the roller coaster, you were talking about you wanted them to feel this like wide range of emotions so that there was like a catharsis, a
Right,
cathartic kind of element.
right,
Um,
right.
can you go into that a little bit more?
Right, yeah, like, one thing I think of is Fortet at Okeechobee Music Festival. That dude is sick with it when it comes to just blending all different types of songs, and, like, that's kind of, like, the main thing that I think about when I think about, like, how I'd wanna perform, or, like, how I'd wanna do something, or how I'd wanna put my music together, is, like, that type of specific journey to where you're still like, "Fuck yeah," but it can be, like, an emotional "fuck yeah," or it can be, like, an energetic "fuck yeah," like, I wanna dance at the same time, you know?
Okay, cool.
And,
Um,
like, some shit that also makes you wanna just hug the person next to you.
okay. All right, cool. Well, I want you to now think about this format, and we're
Yeah.
gonna rewind the clock, run Lola Run style. And in this
Oh god.
parallel dimension, I've not had this conversation with you, and I'm that other musician, and you're going to a party, and here I come, and I press the floor above you as the elevator door closes. I look over, and after noticing your awesome beard, I'm like, oh, he's dressed like a musician. Wonder if he makes music. The conversation ensues, and this is your chance to make me want to go look up your music when I get to where I'm going. What do you say?
All right. So I make deep, simplistic, melodic, but energetic music for the type of people that want to dance, say fuck yeah, and feel the energy in an open air format.
That's pretty good. That's definitely better. That's much more clear. The demographic of people who listen to music outdoors is different than the people who listen to music in like a club or when it comes on the radio at work. That's
Right.
starting to get a little bit more defined in your audience, and
Right.
it's you've said some things that talk about an aesthetic now a little bit more,
Mhm.
as well as an emotional dimension. So that's definitely getting better. Okay, cool. So, all right. So now we're on to Jacob. Jacob, you have the floor. Same thing. It's 5 years in the future. You've achieved your wildest musical dreams, and you are a producer of the utmost competence with a large body of completed work. And you're going to a party. You're dressed like you're going to a party. It's on the second from the top floor at this building that your friend lives in that's kind of nice, and you're stoked. You're feeling good. You get into the elevator, and in comes one of your biggest inspirations, number one on your artist pantheon list, and they press the floor above yours. The elevator doors close. They look at you, see that you're a charismatic individual dressed like a musician, correctly assume you're a musician, and then ask you about your music. What do you say that makes them want to look your music up when they get out of that elevator?
Uh, I like to make music that make people take them on a trip, kind of like on a roller coaster, something euphoric, something that they get lost in, but then at the same time kind of switch it up and go into something more groovy and feeling and just kind of get lost in within the night and forget everything else but where they are in that moment.
That could be a band.
Okay.
That could be a band. That could be any musician could describe their music in that way. Like, think about it in terms of a drug. I make insert adjective music for insert demographic that want to insert goal.
What was the first part?
You could say, well, I make insert descriptors music for insert people or place that you play music. So it could be a demographic, or you could say, I make, Burning Man music. That would be a demographic and an event, right? So it's like, I make insert adjective music for insert demographic / space that want to insert goal.
Make euphoric, cinematic, and groovy music for people who want to get lost and forget their inhibitions in life and take them back in time. In an open air concept. However, I also like the idea of audio and visuals together. So kind of combine those two as well.
Okay, cool. So is this a DJ format? Is this a live PA format? Like, you haven't specified if it's like electronic music or band music or,
electronic music.
Yeah, because it's not like you should never list genres. Like, it's fine to list genres and stuff as long as you have something else that's specific about what you're doing that sets your music apart from, what an AI is going to hit if you put that genre in as a generation guide in the prompt. So I mean, euphoric music was good. People who like to listen to it outside. I mean, people will often say something like, I make 4 on the floor party music, or progressive house, if you want to be more specific. So, you could say like, I make like, euphoric progressive house music. And I like to do audio video sets that are spontaneous, where you could go anywhere at any time, predominantly at music festivals and concert spaces. And I want people to feel an escape and a release when they participate in this music. That's getting there. Now, that is a lot of those things are probably true of anyone in the genre. So, including, it's like you mentioned, nostalgic as one of the things. So the more you can kind of quantify what that means, like, is it nostalgic? Like, do you record everything to cassettes? What is nostalgic? Like,
nostalgic to me is a lot of like older style sounds, specifically, honestly, a lot of video game sounds. That kind of does it.
See, I had no idea until just now that you would use video game sounds. Until just now.
Huge gamer. At least I used to be. But a lot of like old school video game sounds, not necessarily chiptune, but could be chiptune inspired.
A lot of that's tracker music too, like especially the 90s, like all that shit was composed in trackers before they had DAWs. There's this, if you just look up like the history of music trackers, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And then Renoise has this like, it's like a sampler that's basically like a mini tracker that you can load as a VST inside of Ableton. And then you can get some of those kind of like tracker music composition techniques. But a lot of that, like those like really kind of complicated melodic structures and like probability events and stuff, a lot of that stuff in the aesthetic is from trackers.
Okay.
But yeah, okay. So other dimensions like organic versus mechanical, human versus inhuman, figurative versus abstract, popular versus niche, a lot of those different kinds of dimensions. If there are commonalities in those dimensions of the artists in your pantheon, you'd want to figure out which of those commonalities are you keeping. And as you kind of populate those Dungeons and Dragons character sheets, right, you may notice that all of the artists in your pantheon land in one area of one dimension. You're going to want that dimension to be something that you directly mention in your elevator pitch, right? And then like some of the best elevator pitches, like my buddy Antennae, he's been around for a long time, and he always used to call his music acid crunk, which says very specifically everything on our fucking branding list, right? Like acid definitely implies like, you've got underground electronic music, warehouse parties, fucking festivals. You know exactly where that music's meant to be played, raves and shit, festivals. Like it's underground. And then crunk, it's like West Coast, hip hop / trap adjacent acid festival music. It's like it says everything in 2 words. Or like slow form. I was talking to her the other day, and she was watching our artist development session. She's like, I think I'm going to tell people that I make garden grime, which says exactly what you need to know about her music, right? Like those, if you can get it down to 2 words, that's like boiling your cocaine up in a beaker and making crack. And that is what you want. You want your brand to be like, boom, that focused, just to the dome. Okay. So keep that in mind when you're doing, all of you keep that in mind when you're doing these, character sheet kind of things, and figuring out what your dimensions are. There are, I'm sure, tons of dimensions you can think of that I didn't mention, but like get the artists on the list and be looking at the list while you're writing down your dimensions, and then go through all the artists and like score or summarize how they stack up on those dimensions. And that's usually a good way to get to where you need to be with these elevator pitches. You ideally 2 words. And if you can make a genre that says what you need in 2 words, they can put it next to your artist name on a flyer, and that like 90s style. And they used to like list everybody's subgenre next to their name. They don't do that anymore, but they used to do that. And I think that was one cool thing about 90s flyers. When you look back at them, you're like, oh, okay, sunrise, jungle. I know what that is, So if you can get it down to 2 words, fucking all the better. But ideally, you want it to be 2 words, and you want your listeners to be able to come up with those exact 2 words and to be able to mention those 2 words. And the more focused you can be with that, the better. Okay, cool. So do any of you have any questions before we call it a sesh?
I just quickly was wondering, at what stage do you reckon you need to start thinking about stuff like media presence, like social media and like website and that kind of like for someone like yourself, studying music?
It's good to remember that the internet is forever at all levels. So like, it's really important to like get a burner account for any hot takes that you may have, because there are things that don't seem offensive and on paper should not be offensive to a thinking person that may still constitute a problematic hot take on Twitter. So just because you yourself are not necessarily racist, sexist, homophobic, or what have you, there are people who sit around waiting all day for something to get angry about. And if you give them any ammo, even if you're actually saying the exact opposite thing from the thing that they think you're saying, they'll still get mad. So it's never too early to think about that, because the internet is forever and people are dicks. So definitely don't fuck it up for yourself. But most people will usually kind of like have like an alias that, like, if you get lucky right away with your first alias and it blows up, that's kind of a good problem to have. But most of the time, like, you're gonna probably like rebrand at some point down the line, and there will be some breakthrough that you have that you're like looking at the music that you made before that breakthrough, and you're gonna be like, I can't even fucking listen to this shit anymore. Like, after I learned X, I'm like, what was I even doing with my life? Right? And you should want that. Like, that's a good thing when that happens. If you're going to work hard, you're going to pour your all into it, and you're going to find a few different things that are like workflow things or technical things that you're like, oh, fuck, this is such a part of my style now. Like, I had never used generative techniques to make melodies. And now that I've made generative melodies, I can't listen to the boring ass shit that I used to do with the mouse, you know? Or maybe you're like, you know, I love sampling. And once I learned to make a beat by chopping every element of the song up into pads on a drum rack and sequence the whole thing like it's one instrument that you can play, I love the way that sounds. That's who I am. You know, there's going to be something like that. So, you know, I don't even like at this point, like names, social media, etc., that part of the branding and promotion, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. But getting very specific about your style and your focus and what you're trying to do, what you're trying to build, what this music is, what the goal of this music is it about nothing but itself? Does it serve people in their identity needs? Like, are you trying to make music that people can build a subculture around, or are you trying to make music for a subculture that does not have enough music? Or are you just making music for yourself? That's fine too. A lot of the best and most timeless music is creators just creating for themselves. That's fine, you know? But like, the more you can get clear about like what it is that you're trying to do, what do you value, what do you not give a fuck about? Because it's fine to not give a fuck about things. You know, there's like, you know, whole genres built on not caring about things that other people think are really important, you know? So, you know, it's just like, but yeah, so getting really clear about like what kinds of emotions you want to convey, what artists inspire you, etc. And then thinking about not just like, because it is really important to straight up like copy, like do track recreations for drops and stuff that you like, or for, you know, maybe a melodic section you like and you're like trying to figure out why it works. Like, get the exact fucking notes from the song into your sequencer so you can look at them and take them apart. Don't pass it off and pretend it's your music. But there's like surface study and there's deep study. And, you know, to deeply study a piece of music, you should try to recreate it. You know, that's a very legitimate form of study, and it's something that I would strongly encourage you to do with some of your reference tracks, and it is something that we're going to do to varying levels throughout the course. You know, so now don't release plagiarized music, etc., but get used to thinking like, okay, I need to like straight up do exactly this as an exercise, so that I know there's no creativity here at all. I'm just like figuring out, like reverse engineering, like what did this person do to achieve this musical result that I want? And then when you're getting ready to launch your own artist brand and your own music, you're going to have to take things off of the list that are on the list of all of your heroes. And you're going to have to go, yeah, but none of them did this. I love them. They're all great. They're awesome. But I'm going to pointedly not do this specific thing very specifically, you know, and getting used to like identifying the rules that other people do not know that they are following and unfollowing those rules for yourself, or making a rule that you don't follow that rule, or whatever. Right. But getting used to thinking, you know, not just what are the dynamics that are happening, but what can I possibly omit You know, what are the things that I can pointedly not do? How can I deconstruct this genre? How can I deconstruct the music of my heroes such that my music represents a step forwards into the future or into a different direction, or at least enough to give yourself your own positioning ladder, right? Even if it's a subgenre of an existing genre, that's fine. Every genre started as a subgenre, right? But just think in terms of like creating a style manifesto and not just positive rules, but negative rules. And the negative rules are usually where the most originality comes from, is figuring out the rules that other people don't know they're following and breaking those. Those are the ones to break. Okay? Cool. Anyone have any other questions before we call it? All right, cool. I'm going to go now and check in the YouTube chat and see if we got any particularly noteworthy comments here. We got some Miss Garden Grime herself is in the chat room. What up, Katie? Oh yeah, a lot of big ups for gratitude journaling. Discussion of randomness, which is often good. Yeah, randomness is always good. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any like questions. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, cool. Well, lots of love to you out there in YouTube land. And if you've not taken the producer's path, that is the course to take. That is the flagship course of all of everything that I do, and a necessary precursor to everything. And it's very competitively priced. And you can get your money back if you don't like it. So yeah, go do it. Check it out.
Hey, this is King.
Did you know that you could be proud of the music you're making 90 days from now, even if you've never made music before? All it takes is a commitment to 5 minutes a day. Yep, just 5 minutes, and you'll embark on a transformative journey into music production and self-discovery. Can you spare that? I'm Bill Gates, and I've spent 20 years distilling my experiences with Grammy-winning artists, making tracks played over 65 million times into something epic for you, the producer's path. This isn't just a course, it's a gateway to mastering music production without needing expensive gear or prior experience. You don't need to be born rich, you don't need to be born gifted. All you need is a commitment to spending 5 minutes a day on music. The producer's path is a proven system that has supported top artists throughout the industry. And now it's your turn to access these secrets and forge your own unique sound. As you journey through the 12 levels of the producer's path, each step designed to build your skills and confidence, you'll not only learn music production, but also discover how to express your individual style, breaking the rules like a true artist. Join our vibrant Producer Dojo community, get feedback on your tracks, and maybe even feature on a Dojo mixtape. With no subscriptions and free updates for life, your path to music mastery is evergreen, and you can come back again and again and again, getting more out of it each time. So what's it going to be? Continue as is, or spend the next 90 days at the dojo transforming into the music producer you've always wanted to be? Listen to what your fellow dojo members have achieved with the producer's path. Their success stories could be yours.
I started from zero.
Dude, the way you laid it out,
Here's what you do first.
It's amazing.
The habit tracking changed my whole mindset.
honestly,
Huge breakthrough.
Huge difference.
comprehensive.
Game changers.
It gives me goosebumps.
Just blows my mind.
That's when I was like, okay, I can make music.
I'm actually doing some art.
Making music felt more real at that point.
To understand, hey, I'm doing this shit right.
I can show my children's children who I was.
Other people have been saying it sounds good.
Everybody's like, oh, that's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting.
Never found the answer until I went to the producer's path.